Hello there, and welcome to the Super Cyan Strategy Guide for Neverwinter. Today we're going to take a look at the pre-release version of the Guardian Fighter class, and discuss its abilities and potential roles in the game. The Guardian Fighter takes the role of the classic tank, able to take the attention of the enemy away from her comrades and suck up all the damage they can dish out. As in the tabletop, she takes a defender role, which allows her to taunt her enemies, increase her defense, and leap directly into the center of combat. Guardian Fighters draw their power from the martial sphere, using their sword and shield to deal with their enemy directly. Some races fare better as Guardian Fighters than others. Currently, dwarves and halflings are the best for the class, with humans as a close second. The other races should likely not take Guardian Fighter, and elves are the worst at the role. Dwarves make very good Guardian Fighters, getting a +2 to Constitution and a +2 to either Strength or Wisdom. Their racial traits are also not something to ignore, as they simply seem to be made for tanking. Stand Your Ground increases the dwarves' resistance to knockback and repel effects, allowing the fighter to stay in melee range more easily than most. Cast Iron Stomach gives the fighter increased damage resistance to damage over time effects. These are all very desirable traits for a Guardian Fighter. Halflings are also very good for the role, getting a +2 dexterity bonus and a +2 to either Charisma or Constitution. While the +2 dex is not as good as +2 to Strength, it does help round out an otherwise weak attribute in the Guardian Fighter's range. Their Nimble Reaction trait gives them an additional 3% deflection chance, allowing them to help mitigate damage. Finally, their Bolt trait increases their resistance against crowd control effects by 10%, further increasing their tanking potential. Humans, while not as good at this role as the specialized dwarves and halflings, offer a more rounded middle ground. Humans can add +2 to any attributes, making them a viable choice if they go with an increased Constitution score. Their Versatile Defense skill increases their defense rating by 3%, making tanking easier for human fighters compared to some of the other races. Finally, they gain 2 additional Heroic Feat points, enabling them to gain more special passive abilities than any other race that takes this class. Tieflings, half-elves, and elves are far less desirable for this class, as they do not offer many increased abilities, attributes, or traits that assist in this role. It would be much simpler to avoid playing a Guardian Fighter of those races, especially elves. An elven Guardian Fighter is a dead Guardian Fighter. The Guardian Fighter's tab skill is Mark. Mark enables the Guardian to mark her target. The challenged foe will have their physical mitigation diminished and will take periodic damage until they attack her. This ability forces the fighter's foes to focus on her rather than the squishier party members, making it harder for them to actually damage her friends until they turn the attention on the fighter herself. It is wise to keep this ability on any mob that moves his attention off the Guardian, and its short cooldown makes it very easy to keep up. It also has a 100-foot range, enabling it to be used on any foe on the battlefield, be they ranged or melee. Keep in mind it can be only used on one opponent at a time. Combat Superiority is the Guardian's first passive ability, giving the fighter a flat 10% damage boost against all foes that attack her. The Guardian Fighter's shift skill is Block. By holding down the shift key, the Guardian Fighter blocks all damage in front of them at the cost of their guard meter. Block also negates control effects like Block and Stun. While using Block, the Guardian Fighter's at-will powers change to Stab and Shield Slam. The Guardian Fighter's at-will powers provide basic damage dealing capability and enhance the fighter's ability to tank. The powers we will be looking at are Cleave, Tide of Iron, Stab, and Shield Slam. Cleave is the Guardian's first at-will power. It is a melee strike that hits all enemies in a 5-foot cylinder directly in front of the Guardian. It is a very simple attack and should be used on clustered enemies whenever possible to increase its damage potential and increase the fighter's threat. Tide of Iron is the Guardian's second at-will power. It is a melee shield bash that deals damage to a single foe, as well as weakening it. Weakened enemies take more damage while the debuff lasts. Tide of Iron also recovers 10% of a fighter's guard meter. This attack should be used periodically, especially on tougher enemies, to increase the party's damage output. Stab and Shield Slam are special at-will powers that are granted while using the blocking skill. Stab is a simple single target ability that deals moderate damage. The tooltip says that it taunts the enemy to engage you. but there does not appear to be a taunt debuff that goes with the attack. Shield Slam deals damage to a single foe, as well as weakening it. It also recovers 5% of your guard meter. Both abilities have the added benefit of the block skill, making you temporarily immune to damage from the front and highly resistant to certain attacks. Block can make the difference between a very good tank and a very dead tank. Guardian Fighter encounter powers help the Guardian to initiate combat and to direct the flow of battle, directing enemy attention onto her. Guardian Fighters also have some limited stun and damage dealing options. The powers we will be looking at are Lunging Strike, Enforced Threat, and Griffin's Wrath. Lunging Strike is a good initiating power that quickly gets the fighter directly into melee range. The Guardian lunges forward at high speed, delivering a stab to her enemy's face, or face equivalent, and dealing moderate damage. It has an 8-second cooldown, allowing the fighter to flit from combat to combat rather quickly and keep foes focused on her. Its range increases as the fighter levels, going from 35 feet to 40 and ending at 45 feet. Enforced Threat is the Guardian Fighter's main taunt power. It is a large 30-foot burst centered around the fighter, dealing damage and taunting all enemies caught in the burst. Enforced Threat also mitigates all incoming damage for a full 10 seconds. It starts at 40%, then increases to 45%, and then maxes out at 50% as the fighter levels up. Enforced Threat has a longer 15-second cooldown, and it should be used carefully as to avoid wasting it. Griffin's Wrath is a heavy strike that deals damage and stuns the fighter's target. It is a charge power, and the amount of charges on the power increase as the fighter levels up. It starts with a single charge, and then it increases to 2 and later maxes out at 3. A charge is regenerated every 15 seconds, leaving it with a long cooldown time. Guardian Fighters gain action points by taking or dealing damage, and by using encounter powers. The Guardian Fighter's daily skills have a heavy focus on increasing the Guardian's taking capability and harassing enemy groups. The powers we will be looking at are Villain's Menace and Fighter's Recovery. Villain's Menace is the first daily power a Guardian Fighter gets. It is a 30-foot burst that deals damage to all foes around the fighter, and increases all damage dealt by the fighter for a set amount of time determined by level. It starts at 8 seconds, increases to 10, and maxes at 12. The fighter is also immune during that time. Immunity protects the fighter from both conditional and knockback effects. Fighter's Recovery is a massive lifesteal buff. After activation, for 10 seconds, the fighter gets a varied percent of damage they deal back as health. This starts at 80%, increases to 100, and ends at 120%. This is a very effective ability and can heal the Guardian Fighter back to full in a very short period of time. The Guardian Fighter does a great job at starting a fight and locking enemies down. She should be the first and last one into the fray every single time. Lunging Strike tosses the fighter directly into the center of combat, drawing all enemy attention on her. Then the fighter should move to wherever her abilities give the maximum effect, which is typically directly in the center of combat. Positioning is key for cleave, allowing the fighter to strike multiple enemies at once, which increases her threat by a lot and provides a moderate damage output. Whenever foes break off the fighter to attack allies, the fighter should use Mark and Enforce Threat to assist allies and redirect enemy attention, while using Griffin's Wrath to prevent enemies from popping off special attacks. The Guardian's daily powers have different roles and should be used to meet the situation that the fighter finds herself in. Villain's Menace should be used when facing a large volume of enemies, and should be comboed with Enforced Threat whenever possible to maximize the effectiveness of the immunity buff. Fighter's Recovery is more of a danger save me button that enables the fighter to heal up rather quickly. Do not forget the block ability, as it completely blocks all incoming damage in front of the Guardian, and most abilities of the fighter recharge the block meter, such as Tide of Iron. Large attacks by foes can be completely negated, all while the Guardian continues to harass enemies using Stab and Shield Bash. And, finally, if the fighting moves off away from the fighter into another ball, the fighter may simply use Lunging Strike once more to launch herself directly back into the thick of things, refocusing enemies with another application of Enforced Threat. Sticking to this, the Guardian Fighter can be the shield of the entire party, keeping them alive while completely bashing the brains out of the opposition. And this has been a look at the Guardian Fighter class for the upcoming Neverwinter MMO. I do hope you have enjoyed, but for now, this has been Lyat with the Cyan Firefly. I'll catch you next time, Fireflies.